So let's start with domain enumeration. What are the tools that we are going to use in the class? For enumeration, we can use the AD module. This is the RSET tool that you get on the DCs. So this is Microsoft signed, works even in the PowerShell constraint language mode. I maintain a mirror of it on my GitHub. So this is the way you can import the AD module. We will use Bloodhound as well. That has both C# and PowerShell collectors. We'll take a look at both Bloodhound CE and the Bloodhound Legacy. We'll also use PowerView, which is a PowerShell tool. Could also use SharpView, which I personally don't use because there is no filtering on the pipeline. Okay. Let's get started with that. How do we, so if you land on a domain joined machine, if you compromise the user, let's say using a phishing attack, or simply you are a cyber criminal and you buy access using an access broker or whatsoever, once you land on a foothold, and that does not, landing on a foothold does not mean RDP access. This is just for your convenience. If you land on a foothold, what is it as a normal domain user? What is the type of information that you can have access to? So let's load some PowerShell based tools. So for that, first we'll start a PowerShell session using InvisiShell, so that the PowerShell session that now has started would not have any AMSI, system-wide transcript, or script block logging. Now recall the dot sourcing that we discussed. Let's load PowerView here. Let's first simply get information about the current domain. So we've landed on a machine in the $cop.moneycop.local. Of course, moneycop.local is the forest. That is how domains are named. The domain on the right side is the parent. So $cop.moneycop.local is the domain. Moneycop, of course, is the forest. It has just one domain controller called dcop DC. Each domain has a security identifier that would be used later to forge tickets. We can get that using get domain SID. What else? We can get some information from the forest root as well, because there is a trust relationship. What is a trust relationship? We are going to discuss that later on. So we can get some information from the forest root as well. We may also like to take a look at policies. What is the password policy? What is the Kerberos policy in the current domain? So for that, we can run get domain policy data. So what is the password policy? That is visible under system access. What is the Kerberos policy? This is the Kerberos policy. Why are we interested in this? So when we are forging tickets, Rubius actually takes care of all of this for you, but you should still know it. So those of you who don't know Golden Ticket can simply listen to this. Those of you who have created or forged tickets. So for example, when you use Mimicards to forge a golden ticket or a silver ticket, for that matter, or a diamond ticket, in fact, the default time, the time that Mimicards uses for the ticket is 10 years is the expiry time for the ticket, and then it can be renewed for 10 years. If you're doing it manually without using Rubius, let's say if you're using safety cards or any other or Mimicards to do that, always make sure that your tickets are compatible with what is present in the target domain. This is what comes baked in by default. A ticket would have an age of a year or an expiry of 10 hours and can be renewed up to 7 days. So make sure to take a look at this before you start forging tickets. Be careful. Any detection is able to catch only a ruthless or careless attacker. And you would know when you're careless. With even a bit of experience, you would start knowing that, okay, this doesn't look good, but yeah, let me go ahead with that. And that is what leads to detection. Okay. So we can get some domain policy data. Once we know that, we can get some information about the domain controller. Let's do that. So there is just one domain controller here, that is a server 2022 standard machine. It's the DCOP DC. That's the IP. We are extracting this information as a normal user. We can get the same for the forest root. So once we know basics of what the target environment has, let's get a bit more deeper. Note that we are still only talking with the domain controller, no interaction with any other machine. So we can, for example, run get domain user. In all of these slides, you would notice that some of the commands are in darker font, some of them are in a lighter font. So the darker ones are for power view and the lighter ones are for the AD module. We can, of course, enumerate that using the AD module as well. So let's list all the users. Now, Power View dumps an entire list with all the non-null properties. So here, why we are using PowerShell here? Because of its pipeline. We can, for example, list only the same account name of all the users. These are the users in my lab instance. You would find almost same in your own lab instance. There would be just a few more student users, control users, support user, VPN user. That's it. Of course, if you want, you can have information, you can list information about a particular user. Like this. Now, you can take a look at all the properties of a user or some specific properties. Like this. Why would logon count be useful? So we are jumping ahead a bit here, but those of you who have faced any deception products or highly aggressive detection methodology, detection products. So there could be two things. For example, if you land on a machine and you find out that there is a domain admin, a Kerberos domain admin user right away, put your detective cap on. Try to find out if the user is a decoy user or a real user. One of the best ways to take a look at that, to understand that, is to look at the logon count of the user. If there is, let's say, a domain admin that has 0 logon counts, either it is a decoy or it is a dormant user. Never try to attack a dormant user because you will light up the scene like a Christmas tree. For example, think of it as a defender. A domain admin that has never or rarely logged on now is suddenly logging in from a user's workstation. That is very, very noisy. And that is when I was talking about OPSEC, that has nothing to do with an AV or EDR. This is the kind of OPSEC that you should focus on. Always target active users for any of the attack. If you're forging a ticket, you can forge it for any user. Forge it for an active user. Do not do something as reckless as this. And that is why taking a look at users' properties is useful. Okay. Now, of course, this old trusted command would still it would still work. So what are we looking at here? We are running an LDAP filter that looks at the description field of users. We are looking here for the string built, but we can always look for where there is some description that it is non-null. Why we would be interested in that? Because still, even in 2025, people would write clear text credentials for service accounts specifically in the description field. There is a misconception that I'm not sure why it never goes away. People think that others could not read description of a user account. Everyone can. Any authenticated user can do that. So this could be a pretty quick win. All right. Take a look at the description field of all the users and see if there is anything of interest there at all. Even if not passwords, you may find some interesting notes or information. So once you're done with users, we may like to take a look at computers. We may like to check that, okay, what all are the computers here? So for that, we can use get domain computer. Uh, let's just take a look at the DNS host name, for example, of all the computers. These are the computers or computer objects. So please keep in mind that by default, a domain user can add up to 10 computers to the domain MSDS machine account quota. That is, they can create up to 10 domain objects. So it could always be the case that a few of these were simply created or are orphaned objects. There is no real or virtual machine that uses them. An easy way to find these out is once again log on count. If you found a machine account with a non-zero, I mean with a zero log on count, that's a dormant object. So a nice way of finding out actual used virtual or real machines in an environment. Okay. So once again, what are we doing? We are simply looking at uh, how to collect information. When does the logon count reset? I think when it reaches 65536, it rolls over to 0. I think so. Because that's the short int limit. Now let's take a look at groups course. So if I run get domain group here, these all are the groups. Let's select their name. These all are the domain groups. For quick target, we can filter them, let's say, on the basis of all those who contain the word admin in their display name or in their name. You would sorry, you would see that a group like enterprise admins is missing. Would anyone like to point out why? Why don't we see enterprise admins here? The domain admins is here, but where is enterprise admins? Exactly. The forest root. Enterprise admins is a group that is present in the forest root, not in a child domain. So if you request the same information from the forest root, then you will see the enterprise admins group. Let's take a look at the membership of a domain admins. I think that is the next thing that we discuss. Yes. So how many domain admins do we have? Just two of them, the built-in administrator, identifiable by its well-known RID, and a user-created one because the RID is greater than 1000, administrator and SVC admin. Please note that renaming the default domain administrator is of no use because it can always be identified by the RID. So please never rename it. That's pointless. And as I was saying, that MoneyCorp is actually uh, more secure than 99% of the production environments out there. Just two domain admins show me one production environment that could achieve this. Absolutely not possible. No, it was years ago, I was talking to a client and they said this with a shrug of their shoulders. I would say, why are you running so many services with domain admin? And they said with a shrug that everything just works with domain admins. And in their environment, actually, to be honest, everything was working with domain admin privileges. So don't do that. Find an environment where you would, I mean, still, even in this year, one of the biggest problems that Active Directory environments struggle with is just too many domain admins. And those of you who have worked in large enough organizations would know this, that the moment anything starts working, a database or an application or even a process, it would take a lot of effort to make any changes to it at all. A lot of products right away ask for domain admin privileges. I mean, I recall in like 15, 16 years ago, I was at not 16, it was 15 years ago, probably 2009, 10-ish. Uh, I looked at this product by McAfee. There used to be an e-policy orchestrator. It's used by a lot of organizations in India. At least it was at the time. Now that product was to manage inventory. And of course, what are the credentials that it required? Domain admin. And they were not using a logon type 3. What does that mean? That is, if you manage any machine using that e-policy orchestrator, a domain admin session would be present on that machine. If the machine is compromised, someone can extract the domain admin's credentials from there. So, and do not take it, I mean, do not be defensive if your organization has to use domain admin account to run a service. Your job, and I always say this, your job is to make recommendations. Do not put your job on the line just because your management does not care about security. To have organization-wide cultural changes that should come right from the top, not from the bottom. So you can only make changes, you can only recommend changes, whether to adopt that or not. That is an organizational work culture. Sounds anticlimactic, but that's the truth. The question is, what is logon type 3? Yes, the network logon that is used by, let's say, WMI and partial remoting doesn't leave credentials on the target machine. A question is, what is the difference between domain admins and enterprise admins? A domain admin, as the name suggests, a domain admins is the all-powerful group on all the domains, whereas enterprise admins is present only on the forest root. Enterprise admins the group also has administrative access on all the domain controllers. A domain admins, for example, if we take a look at the lab diagram that we have, let me open that up. I can find it. Let me make a copy of this. So I wanted to open this with paintbrush. Okay. So the difference between a domain admin and enterprise admins is enterprise admins sit here. in the forest root, and they would have administrative access on each of the domain controllers. But for example, here the domain admins of US would not have direct access to the domain controller of DCOP DC or domain administrator of MCOP DC. No direct access. Having said that, if you compromise domain admin of a child domain, it takes you not more than a couple of minutes to move to the parent domain, or for that matter, to the forest root. However, there would be no direct access right away. That is the difference. Another question is, can we have two domain admins with RID 5000? No, you cannot. RIDs, this part of the security identifier. This is the domain set, by the way, that we enumerated earlier. This is the relative identifier. So RIDs from 500 to 1000 are reserved for system. And it is a unique identifier. You cannot have more than one object of the same SID. And for that matter, the same RID. Sorry. The question is, if let's say the US domain in MoneyCorp is compromised, this domain is compromised. Does that mean that MoneyCorp.local is compromised as well? Yes. That is why a forest is considered a security boundary. Within a forest, if you compromise this, someone can move from here to here and then from here to here, just with a single rubies command or any other tool for that matter. So that is why if a single domain is compromised, the entire forest is gone for good. I'll ask you to save these questions for later learning objectives. Yes. But in learning objective 4, we discussed trusts. And I think in learning objective 19 or 20, we talk about cross forest attacks. So let's save it for that time. Okay. So coming back to this, we have the domain admins. One thing that I would like to point out is, I will keep coming back to this. Stay away from domain admins. If you ask me that what is the one OPSEC advice that you would like to give us, I would say stay away from domain admins. We all of us like to brag about it, and I just Kerberos the domain administrator, and I was a domain admin just like in 2 hours. And then I played games for rest of the engagement or stuff like that. We killed that environment. So don't do that. Don't do that. Domain admins are the most sought after and therefore usually the most well protected, most monitored identities. Don't go for that. Keep in mind what are the goals of your engagement. Of course, if the goal of your engagement is getting domain admins, which unfortunately is true a lot of times, then yes, go for them, but do not rush. Do not rush towards domain admins. Exactly, very well said. Someone commented that staying away from domain admins is the difference between real OPSEC and CTF. Exactly. Really can't agree more to that. So it is nice. It gives dopamine and testosterone boost, of course, but try to stay away from domain admins. It would go a long way in improving our OPSEC. But yeah, we'll see ways to do that because everyone still likes that, things that are dangerous for your health, but people still like. So getting domain admins is one of those cases, one of those things. Uh, we can also check membership for a user. So we are right now trying to map attack paths. So if you would like to check, okay, I could see what members the groups have. Can I check what are the memberships for a particular user? Yes, you can actually use. I have to look at the parameter. It's username. I think member identity would work as well. So let's say I want to see my current user, student one, is it a member of any groups? Seems like yes, it is a member of a group called domain users, which is a default group. Everyone would be a member. That's a system group. And another group called RDP users, which is a created group. Okay, great, nice. Then we can continue with the enumeration. We can look for local groups. Please note that domain controller is a special machine to list local groups or members of local groups on a DC. You don't need special privileges. For anything else, to list local groups or their members on any other member machine, you would need administrator privileges. On the domain controller, you can actually list, let's say we want to take a look at members of the administrators group. Please note that this is not a local group, it is a domain local group. There is a difference. So there are three members of the domain local groups on the DC: the built-in administrator, the domain admins, and the enterprise admins. We can get actively logged on users on a computer. All of these three things need admin access. You can get currently logged on, locally logged on, and last logged on. So this is the first time where we are talking to other machines in the network, but it is not as innocent as it has been up to now. This would leave a a log on, a special log on, and a log on the member machine. So not as silent as others were. We can also look for shares on other machines in the domain. We can also look for files. So these are power view commands for that. However, what I would suggest, if you're looking for shares, do look for shares. You may like to use actually Power Hunt Shares by NetSpy. That's a very, very interesting tool. Noisy, yes. Why? So whenever you are running a tool that interacts with all the machines in the domain, or even if you are a bit smart and you would like to, let's say, go for a certain set of machines at a time, when a machine connects to a member machine, when an identity connects to any member machine, it will leave a log on log 4624 and a log off log 4634. So creating or leaving 4624 and 4634 on a large number of machines in rapid succession with high frequency may lead to detection. Also, this servers.txt here that we have, always remember to remove the domain controller from it. If you try to list shares on the domain controller, and if an MDI sensor is there, it would cry its lungs out. So don't do that. Once again, any activity that includes connecting to a large number of machines in the domain, for example, enumerating shares, that should be done pretty carefully, because there is a chance that if you connect to multiple number of machines in quick frequency, there would be chances of detection.